The war was about to end. For most of the galaxy, this was a fact as cold and immutable as the vacuum between stars. It wasn't a question of if, but when. The end wouldn't come with a final, glorious battle, a clash of titans worthy of the history books. It would come with a silent, methodical, and soul-crushing extinguishment. A creeping darkness that simply consumed the light. For the Cygnan people, on their shimmering jewel of a world, Cygni Prime, that end had arrived. Their history, a vibrant tapestry woven over 30,000 years, was about to be torn from the loom. They were a people of art and science, whose cities were carved like crystalline sculptures and whose gardens floated in the upper atmosphere, breathing life and beauty into the very air. They had mapped nebulae, composed symphonies that echoed the birth of stars, and solved theoretical physics problems that other species hadn't even thought to ask. They had never, in their entire existence, needed to perfect the art of killing. That oversight was now costing them everything. Their defense fleet, a proud collection of vessels shaped like elegant, silver birds of prey, died without a whisper. On the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Kalen watched the tactical display, his reptilian features pulled taut with a horror so profound it felt like a physical weight crushing his chest. 17 capital ships, the pride of the Cygnan fleet, were gone. Not destroyed in fire and fury, but simply erased. One moment, they were there, valiant and defiant. The next, their icons on his screen blinked red, then grayed out. Obliterated. Over 40,000 of his people, men and women he had trained with, shared meals with, whose families he knew, had been snuffed out before their instruments could even register the killing blow, let alone scream a distress call into the void. The enemy ships had torn a hole through hyperspace with an impossible, surgical precision. They didn't arrive, they manifested. They were obsidian daggers, geometric nightmares that seemed to drink the light of the nearby star, absorbing all sensor pings, all energy blasts, all hope. Their design was a declaration of contempt for life itself. The Void Collective had come to harvest. "We've lost the Celestial Lance and the Stargazer," his tactical officer reported, his voice, usually so steady, now trembling on the edge of breaking. The officer's antennae, normally erect with focus, drooped in despair. "The colony's orbital defense platforms, Admiral, they're not responding. They're just gone." Kalen's scales, usually iridescent with command authority, flattened against his skull, a deep, instinctual gesture of profound grief and fear among his species. He could see it on the main view screen. The orbital stations, magnificent rings of light and power that had guarded his world for centuries, were now just silent, dark debris fields, tumbling in the cold dark. The collective wasn't just defeating them, they were dismantling their entire civilization, piece by piece, with the detached efficiency of a butcher rendering a carcass. The Cygnans were the cultural heart of the Allied worlds, a coalition of peaceful species who had banded together for mutual defense and prosperity. Now, they were about to become another grim statistic, another conquered world in the collective's relentless, brutal expansion. Their people would either be butchered on the spot, or worse, they would be reprocessed. It was the collective's most monstrous signature. They didn't just take your world, they took your people. Their very biomass, the physical matter of every man, woman, and child, would be melted down in vast, mobile factories and repurposed into the grotesque slurry that fueled the collective's ever-growing war machine. You didn't just die, you became the weapon that would kill the next world. "Send the emergency beacon," Kalen ordered, his voice hollow, a ghost of its former authority. "All frequencies. Full spectrum broadcast. Encrypt the location data but leave the channel open." It was a useless gesture, a final prayer whispered into an uncaring cosmos. He knew it. His crew knew it. The nearest Allied response fleet, a lumbering assembly from the Voltui and the Pelans, was at least 2 days away, and that was if they pushed their engines to the breaking point. Cygni Prime wouldn't last 2 hours. The first of the collective's massive, spidery harvester ships were already beginning their descent, their shadows falling across the crystal cities below. The slaughter was about to begin. The tactical officer complied, his claws tapping at the console with a grim finality. But then, he froze. His antennae, which had been drooping in defeat, suddenly twitched and shot straight up. It was a sign of confusion, of an anomaly that didn't fit the pattern of their destruction. "Admiral," he began, his voice hesitant. I'm getting something. An unknown vessel. It just dropped out of FTL, approaching from Vector 73 Delta. Kalen's 3 hearts sank. Collective reinforcements. "No, sir," the officer stammered, his eyes wide as he stared at his readings. "The energy signature is wrong. It's not a collective profile. It's not an allied world's profile either. It's Admiral, I've never seen anything like it. The power output is off the charts, but it's chaotic. Unrefined." The main view screen, which had been focused on the descending harvesters, automatically shifted to the new contact. And every soul on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn fell into a stunned silence. The ship that appeared on their screen was an insult to every known principle of starship engineering and aesthetics. Where allied vessels were all graceful curves and organic, flowing lines, and collective ships were angular, insectoid nightmares of sharp edges and menacing purpose, this thing was a monster born of pure, unadulterated function. It was a massive, rectangular slab of gunmetal gray steel. A flying brick. A brutalist block that seemed to actively defy the notion that a starship should be anything other than a weapon. There were no sleek lines, no elegant nacelles, no attempt at beauty. Its hull was a patchwork of armor plates, bristling with what could only be weapon emplacements of every conceivable size. It was scarred, pitted, and scorched in ways that told a long and violent story, a history written in plasma burns and micrometeorite impacts. It was the ugliest, most terrifyingly beautiful thing Kalen had ever laid his eyes on. It didn't look like it flew through space. It looked like it punched its way through it. "What in the name of the first stars is that?" Kalen whispered, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. The unknown vessel didn't slow down. It didn't hail them. It didn't maneuver for position. It accelerated. It punched forward with a burst of raw, violent power that made the advanced Signan engines look like children's toys. It was a battering ram aimed at the heart of the collective fleet. And then, something impossible happened. Before anyone could fully process what they were seeing, the very fabric of space around the newcomer seemed to ripple, to distort, to glitch like a corrupted image file. And the void collective ships began to die. Underscore 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 underscore. On the bridge of the United Human Navy's first and only interstellar battleship, the UHN Defiance, Admiral Evelyn Eve Reed stood like a statue carved from Texas granite. At 58 years old, her steel-gray hair was cropped close to her skull in a no-nonsense military cut, and her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed winter sea, scanned the tactical display with an unnerving calm. She was a product of Earth's brutal unification wars, a series of conflicts that had nearly torn the planet apart before forging it into a single, unified entity. She had been chosen to command humanity's bold, and arguably reckless, first venture into the stars for one simple reason: Eve Reed knew how to win ugly. "All stations, report combat status," she said, her voice steady, carrying a hint of a West Texas drawl that was as comforting to her crew as it was, unknowingly, about to be terrifying to her enemies. The tension on her bridge was thick enough to taste, but it was a familiar tension, the coiled energy of a predator about to strike. Her crew, 142 men and women pulled from every nation of a newly united Earth, responded with the chilling efficiency of a species that had spent its entire history perfecting warfare, even when they didn't know who the enemy would be. They were the absolute best humanity had to offer, not just in intellect, but in grit. "Enemy vessels identified, Admiral," reported Commander Marcus Thorne, her young but fiercely competent tactical officer. He pointed to the holographic display in the center of the room. 17 capital-class ships, looks like they're dreadnought and cruiser variants. Another dozen support vessels in high orbit. Energy signatures are a 100% match for the intelligence we gathered from our deep space probes. It's the collective, all right. No doubt about it. And the locals? Reed asked, her gaze not leaving the display. Thorne's expression tightened. Nearly wiped out, ma'am. We're reading one command ship, the one that sent the beacon, heavily damaged and losing life support. The planet's surface shows multiple impact zones consistent with orbital bombardment. The harvesters are already on their way down. A single muscle in Reed's jaw twitched. That was the only outward sign of her fury. Then we're not too late, she said, her voice dropping a notch, becoming colder. Commander Thorne, activate the Mobius drive. Combat pattern Delta. A deep, gut-wrenching hum filled the ship, a vibration that felt less like a sound and more like reality itself was groaning under the strain. The UHN Defiance trembled as its revolutionary propulsion system engaged. The Mobius drive was humanity's dirty little secret. While the rest of the galaxy pursued faster-than-light travel through elegant wormholes or stable hyperspace lanes, human physicists, driven by military desperation, had taken a sledgehammer to the laws of physics. They hadn't found a way around spacetime, they had found a way to break it. The Mobius drive created localized, violently unstable folds in the spacetime continuum, allowing the Defiance to effectively exist in multiple places at once, if only for the briefest fractions of a second. To the Void collective sensors, it would be a quantum nightmare. The human ship would appear to be teleporting erratically around the battlefield, a ghost in their perfectly ordered machine, impossible to track, impossible to target. Target their lead dreadnought. That big ugly one right in the middle, Reed ordered. Kinetic lances. Give them a full broadside. All 3 barrels. Humanity had looked at the energy weapons and fancy shields used by the established galactic powers and had, collectively, scoffed. Shields could be modulated. Energy could be dispersed. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could cheat simple, brutal physics. The kinetic lances were, in essence, the most sophisticated and powerful railguns ever conceived. They were continent-sized magnetic accelerators that fired 20-ton slugs of solid osmium-tungsten alloy at an appreciable percentage of the speed of light. There was no shield in the known galaxy that could withstand such an impact. It didn't matter how advanced your technology was. Getting hit by one was the energy equivalent of a tactical nuclear detonation, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was, as the weapons designers back in the Nevada desert had called it, a physics problem with no solution. Firing solution locked and verified, Admiral, Thorne confirmed, his fingers flying across his console. On your mark. Reed leaned forward slightly in her command chair, her eyes glinting. Make it rain. The Defiance didn't roar. It didn't fire a brilliant beam of light. There was just a deep, deafening, and bone-jarring thump-thump-thump that felt more like a physical impact to the ship's frame than a sound. On the tactical display, 3 invisible lines of projected trajectory crossed the 50,000-mile gap in less than a second. The collective dreadnought, a vessel that had cracked worlds and harvested civilizations, simply vanished. One moment it was there, the apex predator of the void. The next, its center third was replaced by an expanding, silent sphere of superheated gas, molten metal, and shattered dreams. The shockwave of its own destruction tore the rest of its immense hull to pieces. Back on the bridge of the Signan flagship, Admiral Kalen and his crew could only stare, their mouths agape, in stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. The collective ship, a monster that had shrugged off the combined firepower of his entire fleet, had just been swatted out of existence. Report. Kalen finally managed to choke out. What was that? What kind of weapon does that? I don't know, Admiral, his sensor tech replied, his voice filled with awe. There was no energy beam. No torpedo. Just a massive kinetic impact. 3 of them. The energy release was astronomical. The strange, brutalist ship was moving again, but not moving. It was blinking across the battlefield, its form glitching in and out of reality. Each time its ghostly image solidified for a nanosecond, another collective warship, light years ahead in technology from Kalen's own ships, would erupt in a silent, blossoming fireball. It wasn't a battle. Kalen realized with a cold dread that was quickly being replaced by a terrifying hope. This was an execution. A pest extermination. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, his voice shaking. "We're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel." On screen, Kalen breathed, his mind struggling to catch up with the impossible reality unfolding before him. The view screen flickered, and the face of the newcomer's commander filled the display. It was an alien unlike any Kalen had encountered in the galactic archives. A bipedal creature with no scales, no carapace, no obvious natural armor, just soft-looking pinkish-tan skin. Its features were clustered in the center of its head, 2 forward-facing eyes that were sharp and intelligent, a curious protrusion in the center, and a slit-like mouth that moved as it produced sound. Its face was unsettlingly, unnervingly expressive. The ship's translation software, working furiously, converted the alien's sounds into flawless galactic common. "This is Admiral Evelyn Reed of the United Human Navy ship Defiance," the being said, her voice the epitome of calm control. "We picked up your distress signal. Figured we'd come lend a hand against the collective. Please hold your current position and prepare to receive medical and evacuation shuttles for your wounded. We'll have this cleaned up in a jiffy." Kalen was now certain his translator was broken. Lend a hand? Cleaned up in a jiffy? This primate, this soft-skinned, primitive-looking being, was addressing him, an admiral of a 30,000-year-old civilization, with the casual air of a farmer offering to help a neighbor fix a fence. She spoke as if her single, ugly, brutal ship could possibly challenge a fleet that had crushed his entire world's defenses. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he watched on the tactical display as the Defiance blinked again, reappearing between 2 collective cruisers. 2 more kinetic slugs were launched, and the cruisers were torn in half, their reactors detonating in sympathetic explosions that lit up the void. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Kalen responded. "This is Admiral Kalen of the Signan Defense Force," he said, his voice cautious, formal. "Your assistance is unexpected, and deeply appreciated. We were not aware your species had achieved interstellar travel." The human admiral's lips curled up at the corners, revealing a row of small, white, blunt teeth. It was a bizarre expression, one his cultural database struggled to interpret. It flagged it with low confidence as a display of confidence. Amusement? A non-aggressive threat? "Yeah, we're full of surprises, Admiral," Reed replied, her tone friendly but with an underlying edge of pure steel. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a war to win." The transmission cut, leaving Kalen staring at a blank screen, the human's calm, confident face burned into his memory. He turned back to the main view screen just in time to see the Defiance launch a swarm of smaller objects drones. He realized that immediately streaked towards the remaining collective ships, disabling their engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. This newcomer to the galactic stage was single-handedly accomplishing what entire allied worlds' battle fleets had failed to do for 50 years, they were driving back the Void Collective. And they weren't just driving them back. They were slaughtering them. 37 minutes. From the first kinetic strike to the last collective ship vanishing in a flash of vaporized metal, the entire engagement lasted 37 minutes. When the silence of space returned, broken only by the crackle of Kalen's damaged comms system, not a single Void Collective vessel remained. The UHN Defiance hung in high orbit over Cygni Prime, its brutal, scarred silhouette no longer a source of confusion and terror, but a beacon of impossible, terrifying hope. Admiral Reed, true to her word, immediately dispatched medical teams and emergency supplies to the planet's ravaged surface, while her engineering crews began assisting Kalen's own in stabilizing the Eternal Dawn's failing reactor. Days later, in a hastily convened and heavily secured meeting aboard the Allied World's liaison station that had miraculously survived the attack, Admiral Reed faced the leaders of the local galactic community. She sat at a polished obsidian table across from Admiral Kalen, a crystalline Pelin ambassador whose facets shimmered with nervous energy, a methane-breathing Voltui diplomat whose gurgling speech was processed through a clunky translator, and a multi-bodied Gaini strategic advisor, its primary torso doing the talking while its other limbs processed data on secondary screens. "Your arrival was fortuitous, Admiral," Kalen began, the word feeling laughably inadequate. "You saved my world, and my people. The Signan Republic, and the Allied worlds, are in your debt." "It wasn't fortune," Reed stated plainly, her voice cutting through the formal pleasantries. She placed a data chip on the table. "It was intelligence. We've been watching the collective for nearly a decade. Earth may be new to the interstellar block, but we learn fast. We have a network of stealth observation probes deployed throughout this entire sector." The Pelin ambassador, whose name was a series of chimes that translated to "glimmer of truth," flashed its crystal facets in a display of pure skepticism. "Impossible. Our deep space sensor nets are the most sophisticated in the quadrant. They would have detected such unsanctioned devices." Reed offered that same, thin, unnerving smile she had shown Kalen on her view screen. It was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "With all due respect, Ambassador, if your sensors were capable of detecting our probes, you might have also detected the collective fleet before they wiped out your forces and started turning your planets into parking lots." A shocked silence fell over the room. The rebuke was blunt, direct, and undeniably true. It was a very human thing to say. The Voltui diplomat gurgled in what sounded like indignation. But it was the Gaini strategist, a being known for its cold, hard logic, that broke the silence. "The human makes a valid point," the Gaini said, its synthesized voice flat and emotionless. "Their methods are unconventional, but their results are conclusive. Their technology clearly operates on principles we have not yet mastered. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting." Reed nodded, taking control of the conversation. "Earth is prepared to offer its full assistance against the Void collective threat. The Defiance is just the first of its class. We have more battleships under construction. Our scientists have spent the last 10 years developing technologies specifically designed to counter collective capabilities, from their hive mind networking to their energy absorption armor. You have one ship," the Voltui diplomat gurgled, finally finding his voice. "Impressive as your victory here was, a single data point does not make a trend. The collective controls thousands of worlds and commands millions of vessels. They will adapt. They will return in greater numbers. For now, yes, we have one battleship on the front lines," Reed acknowledged, leaning forward and placing her hands on the table. Her gaze swept over each of them. "But humanity has something else. Something the Void collective, and, if you'll forgive my bluntness, none of you, seem to have." "And what is that?" Kalen asked, his voice filled with a desperate, burgeoning hope. He needed to understand these strange, violent saviors. Reed's stormy gray eyes seemed to harden, looking past them as if she were seeing ghosts from her own history. "A history of violence," she said, her voice low and somber. "Peace is a luxury we've only recently been able to afford, gentlemen. For thousands of years, while your peoples were composing star symphonies and charting the cosmic background radiation, we were perfecting new and exciting ways to kill each other over land, over ideology, over resources, over pride. We fought in mud and trenches, in the skies and on the seas, and eventually, in the cold vacuum of our own solar system. We nearly drove ourselves to extinction a dozen times over." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The aliens around the table were silent, their expressions a mixture of horror and fascination. "When we finally achieved a hard-won, bloody global unity and looked to the stars, we didn't abandon that focus. We didn't forget the lessons written in the blood of billions. We redirected it. We looked out into the great, silent dark and we didn't just see wonder and opportunity. We saw a threat. We prepared for a monster in the dark we hadn't even met yet. The Void Collective, she finished, her voice turning to ice, is exactly the kind of monster humanity has been preparing to fight for its entire, miserable history. Before anyone could respond to that chilling revelation, a piercing alarm suddenly blared through the station. The central holographic projector in the room activated automatically, flashing a blood-red emergency symbol. Emergency transmission, a synthesized voice announced. Priority 1 alert from the Epsilon sector. The Void Collective has launched a massive, unprovoked offensive against the Arcturus system. 3 planetary colonies are under attack. The Council watched in shared horror as the hologram shifted to a live feed from a fleeing scout ship. The footage was grainy and chaotic, but the image was unmistakable. Not a dozen, but hundreds of the obsidian, dagger-like collective ships were descending like locusts on 3 beautiful, terraformed worlds. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Our nearest response fleet is at Tau Ceti, the Gaini strategist reported grimly, its secondary limbs moving in a blur of calculation. Even at maximum emergency speed, they are 2 standard days away. 2 days. The Arcturus system would be a graveyard in 2 hours. A wave of despair washed over the room. It was Meraxia all over again, but on a scale 10 times worse. Admiral Kalen, his mind racing, looked from the horrifying footage to the calm, unreadable face of the human admiral. His heart hammered against his ribs. Chancellor, he said, his voice urgent, addressing the Pellan ambassador who served as the Council's current leader. The Defiance, it's less than 6 hours from the Arcturus system. Every eye in the room, multifaceted, crystalline, and biological, turned to Admiral Evelyn Reed. The human didn't look surprised. She didn't look scared. She looked interested. Underscore 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 underscore. Aboard the UHN Defiance, the ship was already a hive of activity, rocketing through the surreal, swirling tunnel of its hyperspace equivalent. On the bridge, Admiral Reed reviewed the tactical data forwarded by the Allied Council. The situation in the Arcturus system was not just grim, it was a textbook ambush. 3 habitable planets, a combined population of over 12 billion sentients, defended by nothing more than a token security force, a planetary police with a few armed patrol ships. It was a force wholly, pathetically inadequate against the Dominion armada now bearing down on them. Thoughts? She asked, her gaze sweeping over her senior officers, who were gathered around the holographic Strategic Command Center. Commander Alejandro Vega, her executive officer, a sharp, pragmatic man who had served as her XO since the Unification Wars, studied the holographic display with a deep frown. It's a trap, Admiral. It's a damn trap, and we're the bait. The collective isn't stupid. They know we intervened at Cygni Prime. They're not just conquering Arcturus, they're setting a stage. They're counting on us to respond, to play the hero. Agreed, said Dr. Elisa Chen, the ship's brilliant and perpetually caffeinated chief science officer. Her domain was the Mobius drive and the ship's esoteric sensor systems. The collective operates with a hive consciousness. Every ship we destroyed at Cygni transmitted petabytes of data back to their central intelligence before being eliminated. They'll have analyzed our capabilities. Our weapon yields, our maneuverability patterns, the energy signature of the Mobius drive's activation. They've adapted their strategies. They'll be expecting us. Reed nodded slowly, her fingers steepled in front of her. So, they're expecting us. That doesn't mean we don't go. Admiral, we'll be outnumbered at least 50 to 1, Vega pointed out, zooming in on the enemy fleet's disposition. No, weight sensor echoes indicate more ships holding in reserve behind the system's star. It's closer to 100 to 1. Even with the Mobius drive and our advanced weapon systems, those aren't good odds. They'll saturate the area with fire the moment we drop out of FTL. We can't dodge everything. Then we change the game, Reed replied, a dangerous glint in her eyes. She stepped forward and manipulated the holographic display with a few swift gestures, highlighting specific Lagrange points and gravitational anomalies around the Arcturus system star. They think they understand how we fight now. They have a data file labeled, UHN Defiance Tactics. They're expecting us to jump in, hit fast, and jump out. They're anticipating a repeat of Cygni Prime. She looked at her officers. Let's show them they don't know a damn thing. She outlined her plan quickly and concisely. It was audacious. It was borderline suicidal. It flew in the face of every established military doctrine, human or otherwise. It was precisely what the perfectly logical, brutally efficient Void Collective would never, in a million years, expect. When she finished, there was a stunned silence in the command center. That's extremely high risk, Admiral, Vega finally said, his voice carefully neutral, but Chen could see the deep concern in his eyes. The Mobius drive was never designed for that kind of sustained, fragmented operation. The stress on the drive core would be catastrophic. We wouldn't just be pushing the envelope, we'd be setting it on fire and throwing it out the airlock. We could tear the ship apart at a quantum level, or worse, erase ourselves from spacetime completely. High risk, high reward, Commander, Reed countered, her voice firm. The collective expects conventional tactics, even if our technology is unconventional. They think in straight lines. They calculate probabilities. But humanity's greatest military advantage has never been our ships or our guns. It's always been our ability to adapt, to improvise, to embrace sheer, bloody-minded, logical insanity. To do the one thing the enemy's perfectly calculated battle plan says is impossible. She looked around the table, her gaze locking with each of her officers. I won't order anyone to participate in this operation. This goes far beyond our original mission parameters of observation and potential first contact. This could be considered a declaration of open war by the whole of humanity, not just a defensive action. Anyone who wants to object, now is the time. It will not be held against you. One by one, her officers met her gaze. Vega, the pragmatist, gave a slow, deliberate nod. Chen, the scientist, fascinated by the sheer theoretical audacity of the plan, smiled thinly. Commander Jackson, her weapons chief, just grinned. None of them declined. They had followed her through hell during the Unification Wars, and they would follow her again into the unknown. Very well, Reed said, a flicker of pride in her eyes. Commander Vega, inform the Allied Worlds Council that we're en route to Arcturus and will render all possible assistance. Dr. Chen, I need you and your team to start reconfiguring the Mobius drive's containment fields for sustained, multinodal operation. I want you to basically hotwire your own engine. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, prepare the full complement of Raven drones for distributed, wide-spectrum deployment. As her officers departed to carry out their impossible orders, Reed remained at the tactical display, studying the collective fleet positions. What she was planning went against every fiber of her conventional military training, against the careful, strategic thinking that had defined her career. But they weren't fighting a conventional enemy. And they weren't fighting with conventional weapons. They were fighting as humans always had when their backs were against the wall, with ingenuity, with adaptability, and with a terrifying willingness to take risks that more established, more sane civilizations would consider absolute madness. Underscore 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 underscore. In the cold, silent heart of the Void Collective's command nexus, aboard the colossal flagship Inevitability, High Admiral Zervash watched as his forces tightened the net around the Arcturus system. Zervash was a being of immense age and power, his original biological form long since withered away and replaced with a gleaming architecture of black metal and glowing cybernetics. He was more concept than creature, an extension of the collective's will, and he had personally overseen the conquest and assimilation of 17 star systems. The operation at Arcturus was proceeding exactly as planned. The pathetic planetary defense systems had been neutralized in the opening salvo, and the massive, spidery harvester ships were already descending, their drills and processors ready to begin the grim work of turning a population of 12 billion into new resources for the Dominion. "Status of our sensor network?" he asked, his voice a synthetic, multi-layered baritone that flowed from a grill in his metallic faceplate. "Fully operational, High Admiral," reported his second-in-command, a slightly less augmented but equally cold being. "All hyperspace vectors are monitored. Our new quantum entanglement detectors are online. Nothing will enter this system without immediate detection." The humans, however, presented a new, irritating variable. Their unexpected and brutally effective intervention at Cygni Prime had cost the collective valuable resources, a dreadnought and its entire escort fleet. But more importantly, it had demonstrated a technology and a tactical doctrine that the collective had not encountered before. Such dangerous innovation could not be allowed to spread. It had to be studied, and then it had to be stamped out. "The human vessel will come," Zervash stated with the cold certainty of a mathematician solving an equation. The collective's analysis of their likely psychological profile indicates a 98.7% probability that they will attempt to intervene to save the indigenous population. It is an emotional, illogical response, and therefore, predictable. "Our forces are prepared," his second confirmed. "The moment they exit FTL at the system's edge, our entire fleet is programmed to converge on their position and fire simultaneously. No single vessel, regardless of its capabilities, can withstand the concentrated firepower of over 100 capital ships. Their kinetic weapons require a moment to charge, and their Mobius drive has a predictable energy signature upon activation. We will crush them before they can react." Zervash's artificial eyes, glowing red pinpricks in their dark sockets, narrowed slightly. "Do not underestimate these humans. Their approach to warfare differs fundamentally from established galactic patterns. The data from Cygni Prime suggests a reliance on brute force and unpredictable maneuvers. The collective has analyzed their tactics from the Cygni engagement," High Admiral, his second insisted. "We have developed countermeasures. We are ready." An alarm, a sharp, discordant chime, suddenly interrupted him. On the main tactical display, which showed the entirety of the Arcturus system, dozens of small, anomalous energy readings appeared simultaneously, scattered throughout the millions of miles of space between the planets. "What is this?" Zervash demanded, his synthetic voice laced with irritation. "Report." "Unknown, High Admiral," the sensor officer replied, his own voice suddenly strained. "They appear to be some form of quantum disturbance, but our sensors cannot get a lock. They're not FTL entry points, they're just there." And then, the tactical display erupted into absolute chaos as something fundamentally impossible happened. The human battleship didn't appear at the system's edge as their every calculation had predicted. Instead, it seemed to materialize simultaneously at multiple points throughout the entire system. A shimmering, ghostly image of the brutal, gray battleship appeared directly alongside Zervash's flagship. Another appeared deep within his rear guard, next to the vulnerable support ships. A third and a fourth and a fifth materialized right in the middle of his main battle formations, directly adjacent to key collective vessels. "Impossible," the second-in-command exclaimed, his cybernetic composure finally cracking. "No FTL technology can achieve multi-point, simultaneous materialization. It violates the laws of causality." Zervash watched in growing, cold alarm as his perfectly positioned fleet, a masterpiece of strategic planning, began to report catastrophic damage from all quadrants at once. The human vessel was somehow attacking dozens of targets simultaneously, its devastating kinetic weapons tearing through the hulls of his ships before they could even reorient to fire. "Order all vessels to converge on the human ship's primary location," he commanded, his voice rising for the first time in a century. "We cannot determine its primary location, High Admiral," his second replied, a genuine, organic fear entering his synthetic voice for the first time. "It appears to exist at multiple points in space-time simultaneously. All of them are firing. All of them are real." On the display, Zervash watched as small, dark objects detached from each ghostly iteration of the human vessel. They were unmanned drones that immediately swarmed his ships, not with explosives, but with powerful electronic warfare packages, targeting weapon systems, engines, and, most critically, their communication nodes to the collective hive mind. The collective did not anticipate this capability, Zervash admitted, a cold dread seeping into his processing cores. For the first time in 300 years of conquest, he felt the icy touch of uncertainty. He was not fighting a ship. He was fighting a ghost. Aboard the Defiance, Admiral Reed gripped the arms of her command chair so tightly her knuckles were white. The ship was shuddering violently, not from enemy fire, but from the sheer, raw strain of what they were doing to the fabric of reality. The lights on the bridge flickered, and a constant, high-pitched whine emanated from the very walls of the vessel. "Drive stability at 78% and falling, Admiral," reported Chief Engineer Commander Park from her station in the engine room, her voice tense over the comm. "The containment fields are fluctuating wildly. We can maintain this fragmented configuration for another 4 minutes, maybe 5, before the core overloads and we cease to exist in any meaningful way." "That's all the time we need, Chief," Reed replied, her eyes glued to the tactical display, which was a beautiful, terrifying storm of green-friendly icons and rapidly disappearing red enemy icons. "Keep her steady." What they were attempting should have been impossible. The Mobius drive was designed for short-duration, single-point tactical movements. Blink. What Dr. Chen and her team had jury-rigged was something else entirely. They were holding multiple, semi-stable, simultaneous wormhole egress points open, creating dozens of ghostly, semi-corporeal iterations of the Defiance across the entire system. It was pushing the technology so far beyond its intended parameters that every alarm in engineering was screaming bloody murder. To the Void Collective, it appeared as if they were fighting not one human vessel, but an entire phantom fleet. Each ghostly image was seemingly real, each one capable of launching devastating kinetic strikes at point-blank range. Raven drones deployed from all iterations, "Ma'am," Commander Jackson reported from the weapons console, a savage grin on his face. "Targeting collective command and control systems. We're giving their hive mind a migraine." The remote autonomous vectors for electronic neutralization, or Ravens, were another uniquely human innovation. While other races focused on bigger guns and stronger shields, humanity, veterans of a digital age, knew that you could win a war without firing a shot if you could cripple your enemy's ability to communicate and coordinate. The drones weren't just jamming signals, they were actively hacking the Dominion's network itself, introducing cascading data failures, ghost signals, and contradictory orders throughout their hive mind communication systems. Dominion fleet is showing significant signs of coordination breakdown, Jackson continued, pointing to the display. Their response times are lagging, and we're seeing contradictory maneuvers. They're starting to fire on each other. Reed nodded grimly. That's it. Hit them where they're strongest. The collective's greatest strength, its perfect coordination and flawless collective consciousness, was now becoming its greatest vulnerability. The Ravens were introducing just enough human chaos into their perfectly ordered system to shatter their hierarchical command structure from the inside out. Drive stability at 62%. Park warned from engineering, her voice strained. The primary conduits are starting to buckle. We're losing coherence. Now. Reed ordered. Begin Phase 2. Commander Jackson launched the surprise package. The multiple, ghostly iterations of the Defiance across the system began to waver and collapse. The tortured space-time folds began to resolve back into a single point of reality. But not before each and every iteration launched its final payload, a full salvo of missiles, launched not at individual ships, but directly into the heart of the disorganized Dominion formations. Mobius drive deactivating. Field collapse imminent. Park yelled. Brace for recoil. The ship gave a final, violent shudder, and the horrible whining noise ceased. The lights on the bridge stabilized. "We're back to normal space, Admiral," Vega reported, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The tactical display showed the UHN Defiance was now a single ship once more, positioned defiantly near Arcturus Prime, the most populated of the system's planets, standing between it and the remnants of the enemy fleet. Around them, the Void Collective's Grand Armada was in total disarray. Dozens of their ships were destroyed or crippled, their hulls breached and venting atmosphere. Others were firing wildly, their targeting systems compromised by the Ravens. And then, the kinetic missiles detonated. Unlike conventional explosives, these warheads were another nightmare born from Mobius drive physics. They didn't explode with fire and shrapnel. They released precisely calculated, catastrophically powerful pulses of gravitational distortion. For a split second, a dozen miniature black holes blossomed in the midst of the collective fleet. The effect was apocalyptic. Localized gravity wells, impossibly strong, tore ships apart from the inside, crushing them, twisting them, spaghettifying their hulls into unrecognizable streamers of metal. Dominion flagship located, Admiral, Jackson reported, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. They're attempting to rally their remaining forces around them. Target their command ship, Reed ordered, her voice as cold as the void outside. All remaining kinetic lances. Maximum charge. End this. The UHN Defiance's main weapons powered up one final time. The ship seemed to crouch, gathering its strength, and then 3 more hypervelocity projectiles streaked across the dark space, silent and invisible messengers of total annihilation, aimed squarely at the bridge of the inevitability. High Admiral Zervash knew the battle was lost even before his sensors screamed a final, useless warning. In 3 centuries of unwavering service to the collective, he had never witnessed, never even conceived of, such a complete and utter tactical defeat. The humans had not simply outfought them, they had outthought them. They had taken the sacred, immutable laws of physics and turned them into weapons. They had waged war on reality itself. As the kinetic lances impacted his ship, tearing through armor that was supposedly impenetrable as if it were tissue paper, Zervash's final, desperate transmission to the vast, silent consciousness of the collective contained no strategy, no regrets, only a single, stark warning born of pure, unadulterated terror. The humans. They do not fight as we do. They do not think as we do. They are not bound by the limitations of logic and causality that we understand. They are a variable we cannot compute. They are dangerous beyond all measure. They are chaos incarnate. The transmission cut out as the flagship of the Arcturus invasion fleet was atomized, its commander's final, terrified thought echoing silently through the hive mind for a fraction of a second before it too was gone forever. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 days later, Admiral Evelyn Reed stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Coalition Council. The setting was no longer a small, cautious meeting on a remote station, but the grand, opulent council chamber on the Allied world's capital planet. The atmosphere was electric. Representatives from 67 species had gathered, their usual slow, deliberate diplomacy replaced with a buzzing, frantic energy. They had all watched the battle logs from Arcturus. They had seen the impossible. The reception she received was a far cry from the skeptical caution she had faced at Cygni Prime. Now, the expressions of the assembled diplomats were a complex mixture of profound respect, overwhelming gratitude, and a healthy dose of raw, primal fear. Chancellor Vidian, the Pellan ambassador, his crystalline form glowing with intense colors that Reed's translator identified as expressions of awe and caution in equal measure, rose to address her. "Admiral Frost," he began, his voice resonating through the chamber. "In the space of one standard week, your single vessel has accomplished what the combined fleets of this coalition could not achieve in 5 decades of bloody conflict. You have saved 2 member systems, and billions of lives. The Dominion forces have not just been defeated, they have retreated from this entire sector, a tactical withdrawal on a scale we have never before witnessed." He paused, his light pulsing. "The Council has voted unanimously. We accept Earth's proposal for a full, formal military and political alliance." Reed gave a curt, respectful nod. "Humanity and the government of United Earth are pleased to join the coalition. Our additional vessels, the UHN Intrepid and the UHN Endeavour, will be operational and ready for deployment within 6 standard months. We are prepared to begin sharing our defensive technologies with your engineers immediately." This prompted a murmur of excited conversation throughout the hall. But then Representative Jolok, a cautious insectoid being from the Persian conclave, clicked his mandibles nervously as he posed the question that was on everyone's mind. "And your offensive capabilities, Admiral? The weapons that turn ships to dust? The drive that allows you to be in multiple places at once?" Reed's expression remained diplomatic, but her eyes held a hint of iron. "Those capabilities, and the doctrines that govern their use, will remain Earth's unique contribution to this alliance. They are uniquely human systems. There are certain technologies, Representative, that require an extensive and, frankly, unpleasant cultural context to employ safely and effectively." The underlying message was as clear as it was chilling. Humans would fight alongside the coalition. They would defend its worlds and its peoples. But the keys to their terrifying kingdom of warfare would remain firmly in human hands. They would be allies, not teachers. They were offering a shield, but they were keeping their sword. As the formal ceremonies proceeded, a blur of alien customs and political declarations, Admiral Kalen, now a celebrated hero for his steadfastness at Cygni Prime, approached Reed privately at the edge of the Grand Hall. "You've changed everything," he said quietly, his voice a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The balance of power in the galaxy, the nature of interstellar relations, the future of the coalition itself. Everything we thought we knew is now obsolete." "Change was already coming, Admiral," Reed replied, her gaze sweeping over the diverse assembly. "The Void Collective made sure of that. They were an absolute. A force of nature that was slowly grinding this galaxy down to dust. We just accelerated the timeline. We introduced a new variable into the equation." "And what happens when the Dominion is defeated?" Kalen asked, voicing the question that truly haunted him. "What role will humanity, with your power, with your history, play in a peaceful galaxy?" Reed looked out at the assembled representatives, beings from civilizations that were ancient when humanity was still chipping flint in caves, societies that had enjoyed millennia of relative peace to perfect their art, their science, their philosophies. "Then, for the first time in our history, we'll get to do what all of you have been doing for ages," she said, a genuine, wistful note entering her voice. "We'll build things instead of destroying them. We'll explore instead of conquer. We'll finally have the time and the peace of mind to learn from your science, your art, your histories. All the things that millennia of peace have allowed you to perfect while we were still busy learning how not to destroy ourselves." She turned back to Kalen, and for a moment, he saw the full, unvarnished weight of her past, of all of humanity's past, in her stormy gray eyes. The steel returned, cold and absolute. "But we will always remember how to fight," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, deadly serious tone that was more powerful than any shout. "Just in case." As Admiral Kalen watched the human admiral return to the center of the council proceedings, now a pivotal figure in the fate of the galaxy, he couldn't decide whether her final words were a promise or a warning. Perhaps, he concluded with a shiver that had nothing to do with the station's temperature, they were both. The galaxy had trembled when humanity's first battleship entered the war. He couldn't help but wonder, with a profound sense of both hope and dread, how much more it would shake, now that the rest of humanity was on its way. They had found their saviors. And in doing so, they may have just welcomed their future masters. The story of the UHN Defiance hits on a hard truth, one we know deep down in our bones here in Texas: being peaceful isn't the same as being harmless. The Signans and the Allied worlds built a paradise, a testament to what cooperation and intellect can achieve. But they forgot that a paradise is only as strong as its walls. They assumed the universe played by their rules of decency and logic. Humanity, on the other hand, never had that luxury. We clawed our way to the stars through centuries of conflict, learning the brutal math of survival. The lesson here isn't that violence is good, it's that the capacity for overwhelming, decisive action is the only thing that guarantees peace in a universe that doesn't care about your philosophy. It's the quiet rancher who knows how to handle a rifle. You hope you never have to use it, but knowing you can is what lets you sleep at night. Humanity didn't bring war to the galaxy, they brought the one thing that could truly end it, the terrifying, undeniable, and absolute power to protect the flock by becoming the baddest wolf in the valley. So that's the story of humanity's explosive entry onto the galactic stage. It leaves us with a heavy question, and I genuinely want to know what you think down in the comments. Is humanity truly the savior the galaxy needed, or have the Allied worlds just traded a predictable monster for an unpredictable one? Are Admiral Reed's methods justified by the billions of lives she saved, or does their terrifying efficiency set a dangerous precedent for the future? What happens when the next great threat isn't a mindless collective, but a civilization that simply disagrees with humanity? Let me know your thoughts, and if you enjoyed this journey into the cosmos, do us a huge favor and hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that make you think, and share this with someone who loves a good what if scenario.